Before time, there was at one time, or before the time, all good, no evil. Then evil entered into, pride entered into the heart of that angel who was at one time good, started comparing himself. He had a choice, he wasn't a robot, to other angels, and he also compared himself to God, and he started wanting to be in God's position. He wanted worship. He's the same one that attacked Jesus in the wilderness. He said, if you'll bow down and worship me. He wants people to worship him, serve him, love him. Not good. But then evil did enter. There was a tree that God set up as a test, not a temptation and test for evil, but he wanted something to allow man and woman, Adam and Eve, to have a choice, to either serve him or not serve him. It was called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Evil entered. Not good. And then evil has been ever since then, 6,100 something years to 10,000 years ago, evil entered into man, into people. Now, sometimes you can't tell just from the outside what's on the inside of people. And there are some people who are religious and moral and decent, seems like on the outside, but inside, God knows the heart. So there's good and evil happening. And the story that we're going to study, again, is a test, a challenge, an evil challenge of evil coming to Jesus. Now, Jesus, because of the Spirit of God that was within him, and he was himself divine, were able to see beyond the outside and see the inside of people. He could see what was in man and woman. When I say man, generic term, it means everyone. Humans. I hope you're like this. I want to be like this. I definitely don't want to have any mucky, dirty, dark, bloody sort of like waters inside me. Now, this is a picture, obviously. We're not water and we're not glasses, but we are containers and we are vessels that either have good or evil into us. So the story that we're going to talk about is some rather shady dudes. Of course, Jesus recognized it right away. And they came and tempted him and tested him again with a question. They were like skunks. Now, these are cute little skunks, right? Cute little things. Cute little creatures. By the way, I met a skunk one time. I came into contact with a skunk. I was in a camp and I was walking by myself. It was about 6 or 7 at night. It was light out. I could see. It was up a gravel road to meet the campers. They were having a meeting and I had separated myself for a little bit, came back. And it was a wooded area to the right. Suddenly I came into contact with a skunk. Beautiful creature. I don't know. It wasn't, she wasn't really close. But that skunk was right there, and we looked at each other, and we stood still when we saw each other. I think we saw each other at the same time, and suddenly there's a skunk in my path. I remember it vividly. And we just stood there probably around 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3. We're just standing there looking at each other. 4, 5, maybe 7, 8. 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, boom. Maybe about 10. Scurried off. I was like cautious when I was walking by there. Why? Because I didn't want to get sprayed by the backside and smell with that skunky, smelly, stinking stuff. Well, these adult men came at Jesus as if they weren't skunks, but they had a lot of poisonous stuff they'd like to get him on. And so they challenged him. Now, in this video, we're not going to at all go into the challenge. I'm going kind of deep, and I want to take step by step, and I want you to understand who these skunks were. Now, the Bible says in chapter 12 of verse 13 of Mark, it says, and they sent unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians. 2 skunks, a group of them, by the way, not just 2 people, but some of the Pharisees and of the Herodians. Wow, interesting combination. Really, really interesting, because they don't like each other. And yet they had a common enemy and they had a common target. If I were to put a bullseye in the back of the target here, they really wanted to come at Jesus and to destroy him. And it says here how they're going to destroy it. It says to catch him in his words. They're trying to catch something he said. They could not find anything wrong with Jesus. What he said was perfect. What he did was perfect. His actions, his deeds were healing people and delivering people and helping people and feeding people and calming storms, and everything he did was perfect and flawless, but they couldn't stand him. See, evil people a lot of times don't like good people. I mean, that's just sad, but it is. That's why there's bullies. Not all bullies are that reason. Sometimes they're being bullied on and they're hurt and they're, anyway, I digress, going and also some other stuff. But anyway, Jesus was, he could see through the glass. He could see the dark questions. Now, what they said was a definite trap. They're always trying to trap him. Remember this? If you've been with me for a while. They're trying to trap him with his words so that they could put him on here and say, gotcha. And the question that they asked, which we're not going to get to, hopefully this is like teasing your, or stimulating or making you want to know what that question was. It was definitely a great trap. Like, if he answered it one way, they would trap him. If he answered another way, they would trap him. There's only two answers, so they thought, but he still got out of it. Jesus is amazing. And so, but let's go into this. It says, they sent unto him. Who's the they? I personally believe it's a Sanhedrin. Sometimes it's Sanhedrin with an N, sometimes with an M. But the Sanhedrin were basically several types of groups of people. What they were doing is they were testing Jesus, and it was in Jerusalem. So I believe it was a Sanhedrin. All the Sanhedrin actually means to sit with, to sit down with. That's what the word means. And it's a court case. It's a local or Supreme Court. Now, in Jerusalem, it's the Supreme Court. It's the highest court there is. Usually between 70 to 72 members. Most of them probably 71. But anyway, Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, were made up of especially what's called Sadducees, okay, which we'll get to them coming up here in the next stories. But the Pharisees, there could have been some Pharisees, like Joseph of Arimathea, it seems like he was a Pharisee. They were basically aristocracy, a lot of them, not all of them, but they were rich landowners, like Joseph of Arimathea was a landowner. He's the one that provided the graveyard for Jesus, his garden that he owned. But Sadducees are usually rich, and there were a lot of Sadducees on the Sanhedrin court. And by the way, I said local, I don't know if I said it, but there's a lot of little Sanhedrins all over the land of Israel, and this is a big one, supreme. Also scribes. So basically Sadducees, some Pharisees and scribes, it seems. Definitely scribes, elders, rulers, chief priests. That's a big group right in there. But I wrote down just three in this case because the next three stories are these groups from the Sanhedrin, because they sent them trying to test Jesus over and over and over. They were trying to trap him. And they were brilliant traps. Like, how he got out of it is ingenious. Like, God really led him. Of course, God's way wiser than anyone else. And the Bible says in Luke 21:15, it says, I will give you a mouth and wisdom that your that your enemies cannot gainsay nor resist. They can't come against you. So if you're following Jesus, ask him for wisdom. I've asked him hundreds, probably thousands of times. Like, I know someone's going to ask me a question. I always do this inward prayer. Inwardly, I don't say, hey, God, help me right now. I've done that out loud before. But mainly, like, I do it quietly. And I say, Lord, help me get the answer. And he really is amazing. And even when I was a new Christian, a baby Christian, I had such wisdom. I couldn't believe what I was saying. I was like, wow, this is cool. I think it was the Spirit of God. So, but the next three stories are going to be the Pharisees and Herodians coming against him about taxation, taxes. The next one is Sadducees, and they were challenging him on the doctrine, the teaching, the instruction of resurrection, being raised from the dead. Then the scribes came to get an interpretation of the scripture. You know, this one scribe comes up and asks him, and so it was a really challenging trapping type thing. So they were hunting for him. He was a hunted man. And you as a Christian, you might get hunted by definitely demons. And if you're the good one, if you're the good Christian, then there's going to be others who would like to pour their stuff in. Should I do it? Should I do it? No. And like to change you. And even though that a lot of times it is people that come against you, even demon powers are invisible and they come without any human beings around. I've had that hundreds of times. Jesus had it in the wilderness and all that. But anyway, here it is, this Sanhedrin. No, not Sanhedrin. Yeah, the Sanhedrin. Pharisees and Herodians. We're just going to end by talking about them, who they were basically. And I've told you a lot if you've been with me in these series, especially about this group. The Herodians, notice the word Herod, are only mentioned 3 times in the Gospels. It's in Matthew 22, the same story, one story. This is Mark 12, Matthew 22. As well as Mark 3, so this is the second time in Mark it's mentioned, and they were plotting against Jesus, second time. Now they were up in the Galilee the first time, and now they're doing in a lower region of Israel, Judea. So they actually became partners. What? No way. Pharisees did not like Herodians, as far as I can tell. No way. First of all, they didn't like the Roman government. The Pharisees did not like the Roman government being over this Jewish people. I believe Herodians were the Jewish people, but they kind of said, let's give in to these Romans and Herods who are in charge of us. Herod the Great. There's 7 Herods in the New Testament. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, we've talked about. Herod Philip, we've talked about. Archelaus, we talked about, there's 4 right there. Later, it's in later parts of the Bible, in the Agrippa 1, Agrippa 2, and such. But the Herodians actually became partners with them for the second time in a row. They knew that there was something about Jesus they didn't like, because he was God. And they didn't like what he was doing, and so they tried to trap him together. Even though they were enemies themselves, they came into friendship for this reason. Wow. Now, the Pharisees, there is some of the differences, what made them so different from each other. Pharisees mainly were religious. These were mainly political. Now, I believe the Herodians could have been somewhat religious too, but it seems like they were more about politics. Now, here's what I'm going to say for the younger generation here. If you go, what is religious and politics? Religious has to do with God. People who like to serve God, worship God, trust God, pray to God, read the Bible and all that. Now, the Pharisees did that, but they did it not inwardly, but outwardly. We'll get into it a little bit later. They were religious, and they acted like they served God, and they were worshiping God and all that. Okay, Jesus called them hypocrites, by the way, which is, I brought this out before. They were kind of masking on the outside. They acted like they were good, but on the inside they weren't. They were not so good on the inside. Their hearts weren't right with God. And again, you couldn't tell sometimes because you can't tell sometimes people what their real heart is until you really get to know them. On the outside, you may appear just like the other guy, really good. So, not good. So, the Pharisees were religious there. Oh, and the political thing, the Herodians were more political, which is government, like presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, kings, and that day it was kings, emperor and all that, Roman Empire and all that. And so the political people were really about man. Now there's a government that's over all of them ultimately, and that's God's government. He will shut this government down, the governments of the nations. It says the kingdoms of this world has become the kingdoms of his Christ in the book of Revelation. So God, this is religious, that's political. And so, the Pharisees are not like the Herodians because they were about politics and they were supposed to be about God. So the religious versus political. The religious of the Pharisees, they were very strict, which is a good thing. By the way, there's different groups, sects, S-E-C-T-S, sections of people in New Testament times when Jesus lived. Pharisees, I mentioned the Sadducees. We're not going to get into this because it's not too much. It's not in the Bible, but there's a lot about the Essenes that lived close to the Dead Sea, most of them. The Essenes, that was a sect. And then there was Sakari, fourth philosophy, the Herodians. So I'm trying to think. There's probably a few others not coming to my mind right now. But they were very strict. And if I had to choose, if I had to be in one of them, I would actually be in the Pharisees, because a lot of their beliefs I did believe. But the problem is they were outward. They were strict and they were legalistic, but they had outward things and not inward. Legalistic, and I put quotes around it, it's a very famous word among Christian circles, means just legalism, like so strict that you had to wear your clothes a certain way, or you had to eat certain this and certain that, and it just got very, very bad. And what happened is it became looking like judgmental and looking down on others. That was a big problem with the Pharisees. A lot of the Pharisees, by the way, each of these groups had good people within the groups too, I think. I believe Joseph of Arimathea was possibly either a Sadducee or as a Pharisee. And I also believe that Nicodemus was he was probably on the Sanhedrin. Maybe he was a Pharisee or something. So there's some good Pharisees, but most of them, not good. So they were very strict, too strict and too legalistic, and they were about the outward. Remember, like I did before, outward. They were trying to act like they were pretenders, play actors, hypocrites, trying to act a certain thing. Outwardly, they were supposed to be religious and loving God. Outward meaning ceremonies, rituals, ceremonies. I could put those together. The appearance of being right, like their appearance. Long robes and the appearance of long prayers, and they fasted on Mondays and Thursdays twice a week, and all sorts of things that appeared that they were right with before God. They were another thing is formalist, very formal, ritualistic in how they worship God and all that. They were on the Jewish side. The Herodians are on the Roman side. They were political. A lot of them hated all religion, some probably didn't. They were friends with Herod's ways, that's the name Herodians. They seemed to be friends with Herods, the different Herods, their ways and their family. They were seeking, it seems, to be pleasing people, like the government and the people, not God. And then they also were worldly, it seems like. They weren't that holy and godly, it seems. And they also were on the Roman side. They weren't really about the Jewish side, even though they were Jewish people. And so there's a whole spectrum, some deeper and more than others, some more hot for Herod than others. And just like nowadays, there's all sorts of groups of people out in our world. And the main thing is that you need to get to Jesus, get to him, listen to him, love him, read the word, pray, and you'll be prepared for the skunks in your life who would like to spray you with poisonous questions and challenges and sins and temptations and all. So stay away from them. Anyway, Jesus dealt with them remarkably. Excuse me. So beware of that, and come to Jesus. And kind of a picture here, take the tree of life and get away from the tree of knowledge and good of evil. God will give you life, and in that life, you'll know light. The Bible teaches that life leads to light. Light means knowledge. Oh, there's knowledge, and you'll have a knowledge of God, and he'll be able to tell you what good and evil is, not some tree. All right, God bless you, and thank you for listening. I think that's it for right now. I don't have any other thing to show you, so thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of that. And then the next part of the story, be sure and get. It's really good. God bless you.